from the spacecraft.
Yeah, you could, I guess you could simulate it, but
Yeah, well, it's just data coming through from a satellite dish, so I guess you could simulate it, but it wasn't simulated. That's his excuse, right?
it wasn't simulated. It
Oh.
was real life data.
Oh, it's real life data, but it could be simulated. It could have been simulated, but it's not. It's real life data because we really went to the moon, So
I can construct you a spherically symmetrical universe with Earth at its center, and you cannot disprove it based on observations. You can only exclude it on philosophical grounds. The fact is, we are using philosophical criteria in choosing our models. A lot of cosmology tries to hide that.
Called JPL Parsons and the Crowley Connection. This subject is very, very esoteric. Not that the rest of the evening has been run-of-the-mill. It deals with the history of our own government and some of the very institutions responsible for sending robots out now between the planets. Institutions rich in traditions and even outright symbolism. But of what nature?
There is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
Our hero claims a warrior's heart. I tell you, the Dragonborn comes with a voice wielding power of the ancient Lord Art. Believe, the Dragonborn comes. It's an end to the evil of...
Listen to these reasons and see if any or all of these apply to you. Because there's been a lot of research about why people lie. I mean, everybody lies. I mean, like, does this dress make me look fat? No. White lies. But then there are more difficult lies. Number one, people take what is not rightfully theirs. They do it to get something that isn't theirs. I mean, there's a sense of entitlement. It's like, I want this, and I can't have it, so I'm going to lie to get it in some way. They do it to escape accountability. They create a fantasy. They create a fantasy, a false self-esteem to escape their mundane life. They do it to avoid punishment. Sometimes they do it to inflict pain. They do it to feel better in the moment, to steal admiration. They don't earn the admiration, they steal admiration. They do it to gain an advantage to exploit others. These are the most common reasons that people lie. How would you score yourself on that list? I mean, obviously, you've done it to take what is not rightfully yours.
I would say probably like 80% of those apply to me at one time or another in lying.
Why do we keep on lying? I believe one of the main reasons why people lie is out of fear. We lie because we fear something. We fear what the spouse is going to think about if we tell our spouse the truth. We fear the consequences of the truth. We fear being judged, being rejected. We fear losing something. We fear looking ridiculous in front of people. We are afraid of something. And so if you want to overcome this bad habit of lying, then the first thing you need to find out is what you fear and why. What are you afraid of and why are you afraid of it? That will get you closer to the root of the problem of lying. We'll continue on this subject in the next video, but for now, I would like you who have a problem with lying, who find yourself sometimes resorting to lying to get rid of a problem, to start asking yourself what you are afraid of and why.
Number 11, Thanksgiving. Pretty much everything you learned in history class about Thanksgiving was a lie. The true first Thanksgiving has been a debate among historians for decades. The one thing historians agree on is the first Thanksgiving did not occur in 1621 between the Plymouth colonists and the Wampanoag Indians. The first recorded Thanksgiving-type feast occurred in the 1500s when Pedro Mendez de Avalos, a Spanish explorer, gave thanks to his crew arriving safely with a mass and extended an invitation to the Timucua tribe in St. Augustine, Florida, for the celebration. The next date in question for the first Thanksgiving Day on America's soil is December 4th, 1619, which was proclaimed a day for thanking God. In fact, Thanksgiving did not become a holiday as we tend to see it until the 1800s. Abraham Lincoln was the president to proclaim Thanksgiving as an official holiday, but it was actually President Franklin D. Roosevelt who signed the bill establishing the fourth Thursday in November as Thanksgiving Day. Number 10, George Washington and the cherry tree. You have probably heard by now the story where George Washington chopped down a cherry tree as a kid and then stated that he could not tell a lie, admitting to his action. The story as we know it today was told by George Washington's first biographer, Mason Locke Weems. It is believed that the author who wrote about Washington right after his death needed to come up with some stories in order to sell his book, so he created several of them, which were fabricated to be more interesting and appeal to a wider audience. Reportedly, Weems received this story from one of George Washington's neighbors, and there is no other evidence of this story ever occurring. Furthermore, historians who have studied George Washington believe his chopping down a cherry tree at 6 years old with a hatchet his father gave him for his birthday is a complete myth. Number 9, Civil War began over slavery. The truth about history and slavery is that it was an issue when the Founding Fathers were developing the United States of America, and it continued to remain an issue until the end of the Civil War. While slavery was an issue during the Civil War, it was more for the southern slave states than the northern states. It was not the reason why the Civil War started. President Abraham Lincoln said himself, if he could preserve the Union by holding on to slavery, he would. For the president and the Union states, the Civil War began in order to preserve the Union of the United States. It was actually the Confederate states who felt Abraham Lincoln was against slavery and that brought the issue of slavery into the Civil War. However, the biggest turn of events from the changing the focus of the Civil War from preserving the Union to slavery was in 1862 when Lincoln first issued the Emancipation Proclamation. So if you were told that the Civil War started because President Abraham Lincoln wanted to end slavery, you were lied to in your history class. Number 8, George Washington was the first president. We were all taught that the first president of the United States was George Washington, right? Well, this happens to be a lie. There were actually 13 presidents between the signing of the Declaration of Independence and George Washington taking his oath. These 13 presidents are more formally known as the presidents of the Continental Congress. Overall, there were a few differences other than the title change. They also had less duties than the President of the United States. Also, the Continental presidents could stay in office until they resigned, or Congress felt a new president was necessary. Well, at least before the Articles of Confederation showed up. The first technical president over the states was Peyton Randolph, who started his term in September of 1774. From there, we had presidents such as Henry Middleton and John Hancock. However, this is not to say that George Washington wasn't the first president in his own right. He was the first president to serve under the United States of America as a true independent country. Number 7, Emancipation Proclamation. You probably learned that the Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves during the Civil War, right? Well, this was a bit of a lie told by history textbooks. The Emancipation Proclamation was issued on January 1st, 1863, which was in the middle of the Civil War. The United States of America was divided between the North and the South. Abraham Lincoln spent about 3 months working on the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln issued a preliminary warning on September 22, 1862, stating that any state which was still in rebellion against the Union on January 1, 1863, would fall under the Emancipation Proclamation. However, during this time, Lincoln had no control over the Confederate States. So what does this mean for the Emancipation Proclamation? At the time it was issued, the Emancipation Proclamation did not free any slaves in the Confederate States. Really? It just freed them on paper. Really? It just freed them on paper. It just freed them on paper. However, it did allow freedom to any slave that was able to leave their master's plantation and escape to Union states. In the end, slaves were not freed until the end of the Civil War, when the Union won and the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, was ratified. Number 6. Victims of the Holocaust. Historically, it has been taught that the Nazis killed the Jews in concentration camps during World War II. This statement is not entirely correct. The truth is, the Nazis were less selective than people have made them out to be, though it is reported that more Jews were murdered than any other group. Furthermore, the Nazis did not just send everyone to concentration camps. They had other areas, including forced labor camps, where they sent some groups. All groups would be categorized with their own tags, such as Jehovah's Witnesses wore purple and homosexuals wore pink. On top of the Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, and homosexuals, the Nazis also targeted people with handicaps, Soviet soldiers, gypsies, political prisoners such as communists, socialists, trade unionists, and common criminals. Jews are usually more focused because up to 6 million of them died during the Holocaust. It was also estimated that up to 250,000 people with disabilities, around 2,000 Jehovah's Witnesses, and up to 220,000 gypsies were also murdered. Furthermore, there were also prisoners of war and civilians killed during World War II. Number 5. United States and independence. We all learned in history class that founding fathers declared independence on July 4th, 1776. Well, this is actually 2 days off the real independence date. The true date on when the founding fathers declared independence from Great Britain is actually July 2nd, 1776. Historians believe that Independence Day should be celebrated on July 2nd and not July 4th. July 2nd, 1776 was the day that the Continental Congress voted for independence. It just took 2 days to let everyone know this because we didn't have social media back there where we could post it on Facebook and Twitter. John Adams in his writings even noted that July 2nd would be remembered in the annals of American history and would be marked with fireworks and celebrations. Furthermore, the written Declaration of Independence was dated July 4th, but wasn't actually signed until August 2nd, because not all the delegates were there to sign the document. Number 4. Christopher Columbus and his 1492 voyage. It has been taught that when Christopher Columbus set sail to find a new route to the East Indies, that it was believed he would fall off the earth because they all believed it was flat. This is the first lie taught about Christopher Columbus and his voyage. By the 1400s, people knew the earth was round.
You serious?
People knew the earth was round.
I'm going to take you to the very first time we saw Earth from space, and we thought we saw Earth from space. It was very mesmerizing. The whole world was captivated. There was a space race going on, people, and the goal was to show you what Earth looks like and prove that Christopher Columbus, our hero who destroyed the Native Americans and all of that, was correct, that the Earth was round. He didn't fall off the edge. That's the part that gets ingrained in our minds, that there's some edge that water's falling off of. And he didn't fall off that edge. He went in a circle around this globe, and that's what it looks like. But sadly, this is not the globe Earth. This is just looking through a circular window like the one you see on the right, and they put a little insert at the bottom to represent the Terminator line. They were caught doing that. That video evidence is out there. I'm not going to go in depth on that. You can research that yourself. But looking at this picture and asking for wisdom, sometimes things are shown to you. And this little picture here of Earth, where the clouds take up the entire Earth, and especially over here, kind of crazy, looked familiar when I was looking at the Rob Skiba video, where he made a box appear around the Earth by adjusting the levels in a picture similar to this one. So I took the picture from the Apollo 11 spacecraft window and I shrunk it down. It's an exact match. Okay, you can't tell me which one of these Earths is the real Earth. Okay, it's very deceptive, but they cut and pasted it in there, and that was the first time we saw Earth.
Furthermore, Christopher Columbus did not discover America, and not because there already were Native Americans living in America, but because he never stepped foot on North American soil. In all the 4 trips Columbus took, which began back in 1492, he reached several areas including the Caribbean, Central and South America, but he never reached North America. Furthermore, there's evidence that proves that the Norse and others, such as the glacial people, were on North American soil way before Christopher Columbus was even born. Number 3, fathers in Christianity. How many times have you heard that America was founded on a Christian nation? Well, this is not true. The face of our founding fathers has been a hot topic among historians for decades. Thomas Jefferson rewrote the Bible, creating his own and taking out any parts he did not believe. In fact, Jefferson explained his support for religious freedom in practical terms. It does me no injury for my neighbor to believe in 20 gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. While the colonies were run under a Christian rule through the British, once America gained independence, people were free to choose religion as they pleased. The Founding Fathers never had the will to form the United States of America under a Christian rule. They wanted the states and people to rule. Number 2, Paul Revere. If you learned in history class that Paul Revere wrote on to warn people like Samuel Adams and John Hancock that the British are coming, then you were told a fabricated story. While Paul Revere did take this ride, he did not say these words as you were told. This famous statement was made popular by a poem about Paul Revere written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. First, Paul Revere did not ride alone that night. He rode with 2 others. And when they found out that the British were coming, they rode back and told several people by the end of the night, so at least 40 people were spreading the word that the British were on their way. Number 1, Newton and the apple. If you ever heard the story of Isaac Newton and learning about gravity because an apple fell on his head, well, you were only partially told the truth. In reality, while Newton did see an apple fall, it did not land on his head, or at least there is no evidence to prove it landed on his head. But seeing the apples fall from the tree, especially seeing it fall straight down, did get Newton to think and write about the laws of gravity. The written account of Newton's story with the apples is told in William Stukeley's Memoirs of Sir Isaac Newton's Life, written in 1752, that says, "After dinner, the weather being warm, we went into the garden and drank tea under the shade of some apple trees. He told me he was just in the same situation as when formerly the notion of gravity came into his mind, occasioned by the fall of an apple as he sat in a contemplative mood." Thanks for watching. Any other lies you would like to share? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Awesome America.
The thing that is most amazing to me is the lying that goes on today. You are now teaching, I'm not making this up, we are teaching damage control and spin. I remember in this country we used to call spin lying. Now we call it spin, and we study it and we admire it. How to put out a line of bull and have it fly for more than 24 hours, and then they high-five each other because they beat the other side if it's another party or it's another candidate, or it's another company, if it's one company with another with their annual report of their quarterly earnings or this or that. Public relations has overcome our whole society. It's all PR.
Many people are not aware that when you watch television, you are watching a program produced by a large multinational corporation that has enormous conflicts of interest.
General Electric and NBC is a perfect example. How can we be sure we're going to get the kind of information we need to have about the nuclear industry, about defense contracts, and all of those things when NBC is beholden to this parent company? Why would they report on that? Of course they wouldn't. Why would ABC report on what's going on at Disney? They wouldn't. There's no point in it. And it's precisely for that reason that those companies want to own television stations in the first place, so that they can keep a check on those sorts of things. Keep a check on those sorts of things.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publicly are true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
need to hear what you're trying to provide. I want to know how you're dealing with all these conspiracy theorists on your platform.
So the first way is by demoting low-quality content and promoting more authoritative content, and the second is by providing more transparency for users. So we're introducing boxes that provide factual information at the top of results that have shown themselves to turn up a lot of information that is counterfactual, such as searching for the Earth is flat on YouTube, where you see a lot of
Your response is to put a box saying, nope, the Earth is not flat.
correct.
Keep a check on those sorts of things.
Promoting more authoritative content and promoting more authoritative content. And
power don't come from a badge or a gun. Power comes from lying. Lying big and getting the whole damn world to play along with you. Once you got everybody agreeing with what they know in their hearts ain't true, you got them by the balls. There's what, maybe 500 people in this hospital. I could pump you full of bullets right now, and I wouldn't even be arrested. Everyone would lie for me, everyone who counts. Otherwise, all their own lies, everything that runs in the city, it all comes tumbling down like a pack of cards.
Catherine Austin Fitts is an expert on this issue. She was an Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under President George Bush Sr., and then an advisor to the Clinton administration.
Let's set up a game of Monopoly, and you want to buy Park Place. What I can continually do is just print money, give myself more money, lower the value of your money by printing more. No matter how hardworking you are or how successful you are, I can always end up buying you for free.
So how come if you or I make up money, it's called counterfeiting, but if the banks do it, it's increasing the money supply? How did the banks get this power? This is Jekyll Island, where in 1910, representatives from the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Morgans, and other private bankers gathered secretly to draft the legislation that would create the Federal Reserve. Ed Griffin literally wrote the book on what happened at Jekyll Island.
Central banks are banking cartels which have gone into partnership with the respective governments in the countries where they operate. And they've been given monopolistic power over the creation of the nation's money supply. That's what the politicians handed to them as a gift, you might say, for the partnership. Now, in return, what did the bankers do for the politicians? They promised to create money out of nothing, now that they've got this legal power to do it anytime the government needs it.
And since 2008, we've witnessed the greatest fake money printing run in recorded history. This financial sleight of hand disguises the costs, hides who's to blame, and leaves us as debt slaves working to pay off the bill. I found it revealing that in the same year the Federal Reserve was founded, 1913, the Internal Revenue Service was also established. An income tax was then instigated so you and I would have to pay the politicians' debt plus interest to the bankers.
The problem is we have a privately owned central bank system in the United States disguised as a government-owned system. Now, if you look in the telephone book here in the Washington, D.C. area, you look up for Federal Reserve in the blue government pages, it's not there. It's in the white pages right next to Federal Express. It's a privately owned central bank.
What is the proper relationship, what should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
Ronald, you have a very strong background in the financial sector, asset management, deposit trading. As far as I understood, can you tell us something about your experiences? For how long did you work there?
Well, my experiences are more complicated than what you mentioned just now. Actually, I have been an entrepreneur my entire life. Independence being the key component to me. I have once tried being an employee, but that didn't work out. Being an entrepreneur, I have seen many sectors, amongst which I have experienced the financial world. All my other companies as an entrepreneur, like my own fashion line for ladies, car dealership and also import-export, had me involved to such an extent with building up my own fortune. It inherently guided me into the world of finance. Working in import-export, you encounter different currencies and you have to go to the exchange to trade through brokers. And one of the brokers said at some point, "Ronald, I've been looking at your life for a long time and you are always busy. You earn money, we know, but what is your goal?" And I replied, "The only goal I have as an entrepreneur is to earn as much money as I possibly can. Because, the more money I have, the quicker I can retire, be free and of course have status. Basically everything you want in this society, or at least, that's what I thought back then." So the broker said, "In that case, stop what you are doing now, stop with all those companies and just start dealing money, go into the financial world." And that is the beginning of that situation that is connected to your original question. The broker had a place in the exchange market and he dealt in currencies, deposits, so trading in assets to make money out of differences in interest rates, and that involved the aforementioned asset management. Those three aspects together formed the interested package I said yes to. He said, "All right, you can take my place here, I'll train you, introduce you into the network. But in exchange I want 10% of your annual earnings." So he basically sold me his spot in the financial world and asked a 10% commission, which I paid him. I said, "Yes, fine with me." Then he replied, "There is one thing you need to know. If you can't put your conscience in the proverbial freezer, and I don't mean on -18 degrees, but on -100 degrees, then don't get involved in this." That was the message. You want a lot of money, you can obtain that, I can help you, but it comes at a great cost. Because you cannot do this with a clear conscience. Well, I laughed at that. I was young and naive. From my youth, from the way I came into life, my far from ideal youth led me to develop a certain view of the world and humanity.
What do you mean by that? No warm, loving family?
My mother always did the best she could to make us feel loved. But she was hampered by that due to the behavior of my father, who caused us to feel more like we lived in a war zone with each other. That isn't an exemplary situation to grow up in. And as a child growing up like that, led me to believe that the world and humanity are far from great.
So putting your conscience in the freezer was fitting in as a starting point?
I was partially already used to doing that out of self-preservation. So to put my conscience in the freezer was not an impossible task to me.
So it became a survival mechanism, do you?
Yes, yes. And my view of humanity and the world around me wasn't exactly positive either. I only thought of myself, that the way I grew up to be out of self-preservation, and I got into that deal. Which meant that slowly I built up a customer base. And as I improved my skills within the network, I got deeper into the financial world. And then it turns out the world is really small and you keep noticing that. Even when I was still working in import-export dealing in grain and such, you notice it is just a small circle. And if we talk about the hardcore circle in the financial world, I don't mean Miss Jean at the bank but the big global flows of money which you use for trading.
Zeg maar de grote geldstromen die op aarde rondgaan, waar je mee gaat handelen.
You are talking about worldwide cash flows, so not the Netherlands in particular where you started working?
The Netherlands do play a distinct part in this story but the world does not revolve around it.
Maar Nederland is niet het centrum van de aarde. Nederland is een
The
onderdeel
Netherlands are a part of a large global financial system, in which you work through exchange mark if you want to do official transactions.
Als je officiële transacties wil doen, kan je dat via beurs doen. En heel veel banken
And many banks, who do the currency
de
exchange,
geldwisselaars zijn,
get certain assignments from clients, which they can't get away with easily.
moeilijk mee weg kunnen. En dan is het handig
Then the need arises for people like me, who were the straw men where big money flows are involved.
Je kan ook zeggen de loopjongen van het grote geld.
We used certain financial constructions, international legislation, to move money in such a way making everything okay.
Het geld zo gaan bewegen dat het allemaal oké is. Dus dat
So all supervisors, regulatory bodies that are in place worldwide, because they are. That no one wakes up seeing what is going on, like a year or two ago, with the scandal around Panama.
Een hoop ophef hadden over Panama.
The Panama Papers.
Yes.
Tax evasion.
I think, well, it was about avoiding taxes. Tax evasion is when you break all the rules. This had to do with avoiding.
Het ging hier om ontwijken.
But when you see what happened there, I'm like, guys, that is old news. And who are you bring with that because it is peanuts and hardly relevant. However, for the common people, that is great news, but it is not anything big, but it does show there is something very wrong in this world. For example, there are people in the Netherlands, with certain positions, who have bank accounts in Panama, with legislation that allows them not to pay taxes in the Netherlands, which is completely legal. Constructions like that were part of my job. When we had to change currency, we had changes, the first boycotts in Iraq in the early 90s.
Dat was in het begin van de jaren 90.
When there was a boycott in Iraq because of the war that started there. And we were confronted with what we called Iraqi dollar. Iraqi dollars, which were actually American dollars. The American dollar has a direct relation to the oil prices, which made it a world trading currency backed up by oil. As long as that connection is in place, the dollar has a value. Officially, the Iraqi people weren't allowed to sell their oil due to the boycott. In theory that is, because never before there was such a big business in oil. With discounts in this case, because officially it wasn't allowed, so with discounts it still crossed the borders. These dollars, because the energy was always paid in the dollars, so the Iraqi dollars had to go somewhere. You couldn't just take them to the desk at the bank because of all the regulations and checks did provide a certain protection. Because money laundering and criminality wasn't anything new back then. Now we call it terrorism. But that was then also the case. So, then you need people to take the heat. As straw men, you got invited to a bank, for example, in Germany's, with basements full of trucks filled with money. And then you think, sure. Trucks, transports, a busy company. Come with me, then they show you they are all filled to maximum capacity with dollars. And they tell you we need to get rid of all this cash. So change them pounds, German marks, this, that, in such way, and it needs to go there and there.
Are we now talking about money laundering?
Well, processing cash. Processing cash in such a way that we can legally reintroduce it into the money circuit.
So that was your task?
That was an assignment my colleagues and I got. You are never alone on an assignment, because you cannot do this on your own. It is not possible. We all know Scrooge McDuck scooping money with his shovel. Well, we literally had to do that over there. It was impossible to process all at once. So, then you need to find a way. Cash used to be the predominant way of paying, where nowadays most is digital. But you tried to find a way to process the cash. How do you reintroduce the cash into the circuit so Iraq can deal in its soil without being hampered? Because they are the ones that own the money. Iraq doesn't want. Look, you mentioned money laundering, but what it was about the boycott, Iraq had to stick to the rules, and buy, you know, everything you want to know about the world. You can know by following the money. That is the bottom line. Everyone can say blah, 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 but make sure you follow the money, then you'll find the truth. Same thing goes for that situation. So the only thing Iraq and their buying partners wanted was to remain free of any accusations. Because the partners who bought it were the ones placing the boycott in the first place, but they are actually all friends on the same side. Everybody thinks there are opposites like good and bad guys in the world. But on the higher levels, it is just a game and they are all working together. However, they do have to stick to the rules and regulations they themselves have created to keep the rest of society suppressed and make sure that it will not be too crowded at the top. So you have to play by your own rules. So what is going on there is to make sure that nobody can trace you, apart from the elite themselves. Nobody in lower ranks can find out what really happened.
Compartmentalized, that's how we call it.
Yes.
Everyone knows only his own little piece. Only the elite knows what is happening.
Yes, but because we were doing the dirty work, we had to know a lot. Because we couldn't afford to make any mistakes.
How high in the pyramid did you get? Were you close to the top of the pyramid?
Well, we were communicating with them. My ego would have loved it when I got to this position of belonging to the top itself. Nowadays we still talk about 8,000 to 8,500 people in the world who run the entire world. It would have been amazing to get into such a position back then.
All right, but if we say the top knows 100%, can you estimate how much you knew and understood of what happened?
In my work, I had to know 100% of what was going on. There was no other way, because of the interests of the people involved were huge. Especially for the top. If I wouldn't know all the details, I would end up making mistakes. Which would cause a spin-off, because those mistakes would be detected. Then the people that don't know anything about it would interfere. We are talking about having nerves of steel to function at this level.
So did you have nerves of steel?
Yes, it worked just fine.
The freezer worked very well for you.
Yes, I played at the highest level for about 5 years. And then it was totally over, out and done with. That was a very intense moment for me.
That happened suddenly?
Well, no, the thing is, I gave a small example of what was involved. So, in this case, currency exchange, dollar to something else, deposited in a safe manner. and managing assets well, so it could grow to rate of return, leading to reinvestments with the money. The level I played at in those 5 years. And that didn't happen overnight, you need to earn your place. I am skilled at connecting the dots, information in order to achieve a full picture of all the things involved.
Informaties op een bepaalde manier met elkaar te combineren.
That need to be taken into account within the playing field, which is a very detailed process. You stand out when you are gifted in this. This is the reason I was trusted with the full 100% of the information where it concerned my jobs. So, I didn't know about everything they knew, but everything that I needed to know regarding the case I was working with colleagues. I was often put in the leading role, because I kept a good overview of the situation.
You're good at making quick switches.
Yes, and I was good at innovative thinking to solve the problem. I had fun, creating solutions in such a way to always stay ahead and outsmart them. Staying within the rules of the game but playing around with them to make everything match up. I love that game. However, on the other hand, you had a great amount of responsibility and you learned more and more about the real world, since through the financial world you learn all of the actual truth.
So you say all. In what regard?
Well, your clients give you glimpses of how the world really works. In hindsight, I still didn't know everything. But I did know a lot, because my clients were banks who didn't want blood on their hands. But within those banks there always is a number of people who know damn well what is going on. So, like 1% within a bank knows the truth of the matter regarding the happenings within the world. Which is not surprising, considering they are involved in the flows of money. Those are your clients. You also have governments to deal with, multinationals. You have to deal with secret services, and what they now call terrorist organizations. You get all of the groups that are involved with the big money as clients. Then you start seeing the connections. So, they might be compartmentalized as you just mentioned, regarding knowledge. But because I am in the middle, I see how they relate to another. You see the money coming from this place, then going to that place, etc. You keep gaining information and thereby an overview of what is really going on.
So do you have to serve and keep all of those groups happy, including terrorist organizations? You were trying to keep everybody happy?
Yes.
My God.
That was my job.
Keeping all the balls in the air.
Yes, indeed. So one of the things that I found out, I did not know that before, but now I do, is about secret services. You think they are there to serve and protect a people, country, etc., but they actually turn out to be the criminal organizations, to be more precise. The system is heavily so. We are talking about financing wars, creating wars, so basically creating a lot of misery in this world. So, lots of conflict. And then I think to myself, if only people knew what the world is really like. Secret services will stop at nothing. Nothing. But they also have their flows of money, because if they are trading in drugs or weapons or, for that matter, people, all that money has to go somewhere. Everything has to be financed.
You say if, but you could confirm they are doing this?
All of them? All of them? So the entire world as we think we know it, is just an illusion we believe in. Which is something you find out in this line of work and where it all went wrong for me, to put it that way.
Right. You mean, finally that is.
In hindsight, yes, it was for the best, but my freezer started to malfunction. There were things happening. For example, I went to a different trade market and one of my colleagues there said, "Ronald, you remember that case with the Italian lira? I sometimes mention that during talks as well. Do you remember those deals, in which we did massive dumping of the lira, which reduced the value of the currency?" which caused a company in Italy to be hit in such a way. They went bankrupt. And then you hear at the exchange, you remember that successful deal with the lira? Yes. And then they say, did you know that the owner committed suicide and left a family behind? Things like that. And back then we laughed at it. Altogether, all of us. We looked down on people, mocked them. It was just a product, waste. Everything was worthless trash. Nature, the planet, everything could burn and break.
Just useless parasites.
Just as long as we met our goals, as long as we were growing, many of my colleagues ended up drinking or using drugs. Not me. Maybe I should have.
Or not.
No, in hindsight, it was for the best and I'm happy to still be alive. However, all those horrible things started to eat at me.
Can you give an example? Because I can sense a lot of terrible things happen to you.
Yes. It is difficult for me to talk about.
I can feel that, but only whatever you wish to share is all right.
Yes. I only talk about things I want to tell. But it does evoke lots of emotions, and with my conscience not being in the freezer, it touches me deeply.
Yes, I feel the same way. All right. Can you tell me the worst thing that has happened that caused the tipping point in your situation?
Well, that was the beginning of the end. You get so deep into these circles. And you sign a lifetime contract, not with blood or anything, to never disclose names of companies, organizations or people. I think that is why I am still alive. You have to stick to it. If we are talking about the worst things that I have experienced, I just told you about things that made the freezer glitch. My conscience started to show itself. Let's put it this way. I was training to become a psychopath and I failed. I did not complete the training and didn't become a psychopath. My conscience came back, and the most difficult part for me was, because I had such a great status there, I was a success. I was trusted with the people playing at this level.
Mensen in deze wereld die dus op dat niveau speelden.
To put it carefully, most of these people followed a not very mainstream religion. So, you have Catholics, Protestants, all sorts of religions. These people, most of them, were Luciferians. And then you can say, religion is a fairy tale, God doesn't exist. None of that is real. Well, for these people, it is truth and reality. And they served something immaterial, what they called Lucifer. And I also was in contact with those circles, only I laughed at it because to me they were just clients. So, I went to places called Churches of Satan.
So now we are talking about Satanism.
Yes. So, I visited these churches, just as a visitor, dropped by. And then they were doing their holy mass with naked women and liquor and stuff. And it just amused me. I didn't believe in any of this stuff, and was far from convinced if any of this was real.
It was just a spectacle to you.
Yes. In my opinion, the darkness and evil is within the people themselves. I didn't make the connection yet. So I was a guest in those circles, and it amused me greatly to see all those named women and the other things. It was the good life. But then at some point, I was invited, which is why I'm telling you all this, to participate in sacrifices abroad. That was the breaking point. Children.
You were asked to do that?
Yes. And I couldn't do that.
Would you like to stop for a moment, by the way?
No. And then I started to slowly break down. I lived through quite a lot as a child myself, and this really touched me deeply. Everything changed. But that is the world I found myself in. And then I started to refuse assignments within my job. I could no longer do it, which made me a threat. I was no longer capable of functioning optimally. My performance started to shake and I had refused tasks. I had not participated. The purpose of the whole thing, eventually, in that world, is that they have everybody in their pocket. You need to be susceptible to blackmail. And blackmailing me proved to be very hard if I look back on it. They wanted to do that through those children. And that broke me.
Is that, you are not telling me something new, what they also do in politics?
If you Google this, you'll find enough worldwide witness accounts to know this isn't a Walt Disney fairy tale. Unfortunately, the truth is that worldwide they have been doing this for thousands of years. I once studied theology, and even in the Bible you find references to these practices with Israelites. The reason the first 10 tribes were banished to Babylonia was because of these rituals with children, including the sacrificing of children. So this is pertinent. All this made me believe, because I realized there was more to life than meets the eye. There is a whole invisible world. It is real. You really do talk about a dark force and a manifestation of light. So, I resorted to studying theology to make sense of it all.
And psychology as well, if I remember correctly?
Yes, but that I did in my first life, because through commercial psychology, mass psychology, I was able to manipulate situations for my own benefit.
That is scary, because if you dig into that you find Tavistock Institute and mind control, MK Ultra, Monarch and the like.
Yes, that is correct, but that was all part of the job. Through training at the job, I got into that more deeply, because when you are making deals, you also need to manipulate the media. You have to manipulate lots of things because nothing can be seen as it is. Everything has to appear to be something different. You see the people as a flock of sheep. You put a couple of border collies and drive them in a direction. And to be honest with you, I still see that happening around me. People are still, through the systems and methods that we ourselves used to use, being treated in that same way, and it still works. People still don't understand how it really works and are still on the level of as long as I have my beer and whatever, completely self-absorbed, also a survival mechanism. I mean, it is the program after all. But you still see how stupidly easy it is to put people in a certain direction, when you are the one pulling the strings, that is.
Mass psychology.
Yes, and later, much later, in all those studies and discoveries, I found a document which they are claiming is bullshit, of course, the Protocols of Zion. And nowadays I recommend everyone to read the whole of that incredibly boring document. Just work through it, read it though.
We are also talking about Zionism.
Yes, of course. If you read the Protocols of Zion and really study them and understand, then it is like reading the newspaper of the daily life. How from their position of ultimate power, and ultimate it has literally become. But that is only because the people don't stand up for themselves. They don't realize what reality is.
And we have all been programmed. If you dare to say you are against Zionism, then you are branded an anti-Semite.
The negative, you can say evil, the Luciferians, the Satanists. Whatever you wish to call it, it is a real entity. I have found that what is written in the Bible, and not just the Bible, you can find it in so many books. There really has been a moment of separation from the manifestation of light, in which a group went their own way and are carrying an intense hatred, anger.
Een intense haat heeft, een kwaadheid heeft.
The people who do not underestimate the severity of this are but few. Because this is an all-annihilating force that hates our guts. It hates creation. It hates life. And it will do anything to destroy us completely. And the way to do that is to divide humanity. Divide and conquer is their truth. Humanity is a manifestation of light. That is the true creation. As long as you divide them based on political parties, skin color, you name it, then you, from a Luciferian point of view, that is, suppress the full capacities of your enemy, their full power. They can't stand up for themselves. Because if that would happen, the Luciferians would lose. Then this monster, the greedy monster, would disappear. I tell people about this old American general who puts an entire room of people in the dark. The eyes adapt to the darkness, but you can't see a thing. The general doesn't say a word and suddenly he flicks on a lighter, one little light. And due to the prolonged darkness, you experience a manifestation of light from a single point and everyone can slightly see each other again. And then he says, that is the power of our light.
Beautiful.
Unite. Unite. Come together. And this entire shit story ceases to exist. That's how fast it could happen. But that is easy for me to say now. But then I was in a period of my life in which I was crumbling down.
Could you tell us something specific about that? How did that happen? Because you were invited.
I started to refuse assignments. My conscience came back after the request involving the children and I started to refuse more and more. I had a conscience and I couldn't function anymore.
But you did still show up at work after that?
I didn't really have a choice. I had my own business with several offices and employees. Everything was still rolling.
It must have been hard.
Yes, it got very hard, all the tensions. So, on the one hand you are playing with money on a high level, in which you can't afford to make mistakes. Otherwise everything falls down at once. Your entire business is ruined, everybody involved, including yourself. Then you are really screwed. So that brings a lot of stress, factoring in the resurfacing of a conscience. I was warned off when I got into this. Don't do it if you can't put your conscience at minus 100 degrees in the freezer.
And you probably realized that then?
Yes, I heard myself laugh at it back then, but it wasn't a joke at all. I totally did not understand where I really got into.
And your proverbial freezer was switched off?
Broken. I couldn't do it anymore. So, I tried to work through it, keep up appearances. I didn't know how to get out of this. I was trapped as well. Everybody was trapped. This all led me to crash completely eventually. My body just simply stopped. The first thing I saw was my mother crying at the intensive care.
You ended up at the IC?
Yeah, I really shut down.
You had literally crashed?
Yes. Yes. At that time I didn't believe in anything, not I can still recall how I saw. From that corner, I was looking down upon myself. I saw how they were working on me.
You had a near-death experience.
Well, you could call it that. I have seen I am not my body. I'm in my body. But I am not just my body. I have seen them working on me. And later on, I've been reluctant to talk about it for a long time. I really talked about it much later. But when I did, I had researched so many things already and started to believe. I was starting to better understand the spiritual and the material. At that point, this intense experience got its own place. The realization that I'm not my body. It's just a vessel. So, I lived through all of that, but I also needed a long time to recover.
Yes, of course.
Yes, I was a train wreck. Complete wreck. I was completely burned out. I had crashed and the body needed a year to recover. Because I don't really want to get into it now, but in those circles, I got tortured physically during my exit time. This was in order to make sure I would never break the contract of secrecy. So, I was taken for a certain amount of time. I was treated. All those factors together just increased the stress I was experiencing. Literally running full speed towards my own end.
Do you mean abductions, as well call it, or programming?
No, they exposed me to certain types of torture. That makes sure you'll never damage anyone in that world. I didn't realize that back then, so this is all from hindsight. It did all happen that way. So the end of my first life was so extreme that I couldn't handle it anymore. I couldn't handle it anymore, in no way. However, my mind power was so strong that it only happened within to my own body. That was, well, I didn't know what to do anymore. There were no options left for me. So that is why sometimes I think, of course that is not true, but I wish, like so many colleagues, I had taken the drugs and alcohol route. At least my end would have been more gentle, because most of them are just dead by now. Even though I know there are more strawmen walking around, there are little still alive whom I knew back then. Most of them are already gone. Well, I was dead too, but I'm still here.
So, you still have something left to do.
Yes. I suppose you could say that, but that is, I can't say in short, since I don't know how long we have been talking, the world that I found myself in. If you have any specific questions, then I can answer them, but I had hoped to be more concise, but I just don't know how.
Well, you have my gratitude for all you have shared.
To me, it is still a very big deal.
There's an illusion of choice that's maintained when you can have 100 channels on your cable system, and how many movies did the studios release a year now? All these different studios, and the music industry with so many labels, and magazine stands that go on and on and on forever. Well, the owners are a handful, 5, 6 different companies.
For a very long time, humans have controlled people in order to gain economic, social, or sensory advantage over one another. Because sentient beings are harder to control than inanimate objects, humans found that systems of mind control were necessary in order to keep dominance over subjects for long periods. In earlier iterations, emperors, kings, queens, priests, clergy, gurus, etc. kept control by convincing others that they had something they did not. And therefore, in order to benefit in what they had, people would need to pay them in the form of taxes, penance, tithes, work, you name it. This is why astrologers, people that observe the sky and theorize about the meanings of its movements, ruled the minds of the populace. Observations of the sun, moon, constellations, wandering stars, and interpretations of what they meant gave way to an astrologically based system of mental control. where people with claims of higher knowledge of the heavens became closer to the gods. In order to access God, you would then have to visit these learned men at the nearest temple, church, synagogue, mosque, etc., because only then could this middleman, authority figure, who had divine and exclusive access to God, provided you with absolution and a guarantee to the promised land, as long as he performed, i.e. levies, taxes, labor, debt, etc. This is how kingdoms, nations, countries, and cults successfully operate. People for millennia have placed their trust in people that claim they had higher authority to rule them economically, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. Kings and emperors found it necessary to have their subjects believe that they had something they did not, that they had supreme authority over the commoner because God said so. These authority figures developed stories, tales, folklore, and literature so that they could justify themselves being the go-between, the mediator between God and the rest of humanity. Most of the time, this literature was only able to be read and interpreted by these authority figures. How convenient. These religions and their corresponding holy books, which held many shapes over time, served as templates of control. And even though many of these texts were filled with common sense truths and wisdom, and they had to in order to remain palatable for people to believe the rest of it, their main purpose was to serve as vehicles where clergy and royalty always had exclusive seat next to God, a seat that justified their rule over the rest of the populace and the reaping of all the benefits that come with it. The controllers steered the populace by placing fear into them. After all, they were God's intermediaries and they knew what was best for the whole. In the not-so-distant past, the controllers allowed the populace to hold true that the earth was indeed level and motionless, as long as they believed they could fall off an edge. This fear of an edge kept people mentally confined to a designated area, kingdom, because after all, slave ownership could not work without confinement. Eventually, in the not-so-distant past, people gathered the means to explore their surroundings further. They started to sail their boats beyond what they were once too scared to test out. They wanted to see this supposed edge once and for all. The globe concept would soon then serve as a new mental containment construct. The idea of a scary edge would no longer be needed to keep people from thinking they could leave the plantation. Because on a sphere, everything's been discovered. To try to escape its confines would make no sense without access to a rocket to leave Earth's atmosphere. Coincidentally, around the same time people began pushing the boundaries of oceanic exploration, a printing revolution was taking place in Europe due to the invention of the movable printing press. This advancement in technology ushered in a new era where books became easily accessible and where the ability to read and interpret holy books became possible en masse. Even though this invention seemingly resulted in a net positive for humankind, it also gave the controllers a refined method, other than word of mouth, to disseminate propaganda efficiently to the masses. Since more people would soon gain the ability to read, they would soon be able to interpret the holy books only the priest classes were able to do years prior. The Roman Catholic Church, the prevailing social controllers at the time, then had to devise a new method, a new set of ideologies to serve as its new mind control program. Since people could now freely interpret their theological books and find God on their own, they would soon need to put in place a new control structure that did away with the idea of God altogether, whilst remaining as center authority and keepers of exclusive higher knowledge. In order to usher in a new era where the concept of a creator was no longer needed and where only technocrats, learned men appointed and certified by the church, could explain the intricate workings of the heavens correctly, they utilized their own agents, i.e. Pythagoras, Kepler, Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, Lemaitre, Einstein, etc. These agents would later on be exalted in government-sponsored textbooks as genius rebels that went against the system to liberate humanity from oppression. The power of propaganda. The church built observatories and indoctrinated the whole of Earth with new stories, fables, and theories on how things actually worked. They utilized accounts of Greeks measuring shadows with sticks, electronically powered pendulums, fake moon landing footage, and men in sheds with lead balls observing gravity, which is nothing more than the God of the gaps in the heliocentric model, the piece that makes it all work, where illogical leaps could be explained by an ever-changing, elusive force, to convince the populace that their senses were incorrect. They would then be able to say with all sincerity that what you're looking at is a mirage, you're perceiving it all wrong, listen to us, we have the big telescopes, we have the smart men over here that know things, we have the exclusive higher knowledge you'll never attain without our certification. Trust us, we know what's best for you. And so that's how humanity went from knowing they were living on a motionless stationary plane to believing they lived on a spinning magical potato rock suspended in the vacuum of space. That's how the royal elite, who had ruled ecclesiastically wearing long flowy robes and tall mitre hats, transitioned into business suits and lab coats. Now they could rule people using global fear propaganda. They no longer needed an angry god rocking a wicked beard. They could now claim that the sun could explode at any time. They could claim that sunshine could kill you unless you bought a toxic product to rub on yourself before going outside. They could claim that at any time a nuclear bomb could drop on their heads. They could claim that an asteroid could demolish and wipe them out just like the dinosaurs. They could now claim that humans are at constant odds with nature and that the government would serve as protector from the universe's wrath. They could now blame humans for rising and cooling temperatures, and they had the fake satellite data to prove it. They could now tax the human race for breathing. No longer would they need to pass the collection plate for absolution. They can now charge you for your sinful carbon footprint. They can now keep you in fear because science, theoretical, speculative science, mind you, said so. That's the game that authority, priests, clergy, kings, emperors, and now technocrats have used for ages in order to keep everyone in the dark. They have made their subjects trust in them and distrust their own senses. It's the only way system of controls work. You need to believe in them and not trust in your own self. They removed the trivium from the school systems in order to stop critical thinking. The trivium method outlines the concept and order of input, processing, and output. It illustrates how to apply critical thinking to any subject you may come across. It liberates your mind from belief and outside control. Knowledge is power is the old adage, and it holds true for a reason. To summarize, here's why lying about the shape of the earth matters. 1. It creates a system of control that suppresses the majority and benefits the controlling minority economically, socially, and physically. 2. The shape molds one's surroundings into a paradigm based on a source outside of one's own experience. It throws out one's experiences in exchange for belief. 3. To fit a materialistic and deterministic philosophy where everything's an accident set in motion eons ago that cannot be altered by will. A philosophy where human beings are just dominoes, chemicals bumping into each other. A mere result of mechanical processes with no agency, responsibility, accountability, morals, or set principles. 4. To enclose an area into a prescribed shape that in reality may actually be larger. A holding pen that also stops the entertaining of the idea that there might be more land on Earth. 5. To disempower one from knowing where they truly are, to misdirect them from exploring the fundamentals of their own understandings of life. To implant an explanation into the minds of individuals to define who they are, where they are, and why they are here. To give an impression that it's all an accident, and that it's really difficult to understand anything substantial. It's too complex, just work, increase your bank account, pay your taxes, and enjoy the few holidays a year we give you. 6. To promote the idea that life is not intelligent. To disempower the psyche and demote the individual to a speck of nothingness, where only the worthy can rise to the ranks of importance and decision-making status. To make one feel worthless, fearful, stressed, and bewildered so that one adopts any delusional belief or idea of life promoted by an authority figure or system. 7. The globe promotes ideologies like evolution that gives way to racism, eugenics, classism, and the concept of survival of the fittest. These ideologies keep the populace segmented, fighting against one another based on false assumptions and unfalsifiable theories. It creates an environment where dog eats dog, where scarcity rules supreme. It creates a competitive economy of unbalance, division, and fear, where everything in nature is a potential threat that needs a government to regulate and protect. It does away with our innate symbiotic nature with Earth and its inhabitants, which then falsely justifies putting ourselves at the top of the food chain, giving way to speciesism and meat eating. 8. To revise old ecclesiastical mind control systems like Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, etc., with a technocratic base structure, where pope hats and priest collars could then be replaced with PhD credentials and peer review. 9. controlling your access to your spirituality, to place a space between you and the Creator, where intermediaries discourage you from knowing that you can access your spirituality without them. 10. To generate fear via a chaotic model of life, where humanity is in constant conflict with the natural world, i.e. solar flares, volcanoes, tectonic plates, supernova implosions, black holes, asteroids, aliens, cataclysmic floods, etc. This is not an exhaustive list. The more you unravel the lies, the more you begin to realize that your senses can be trusted. You'll begin to be your own observer, tester, and yes, scientist of the natural environment that surrounds you. You'll begin to unshackle the mental chains that you never knew you had.
This is like so, I'm so hyped about this topic. I've been studying it for so long. I'm a psycho about the flat earth because what we were told, people say the number one question is like, how does it really affect our lives? Are we on a ball that's spinning? Are we on something flat? Even if we know the truth, what does it matter? None of us are going above the atmosphere. We're not going above the firmament, most of us in our lifetime. Why would everybody lie? Why would all these organizations and institutions go for so long to make us believe that we're on a ball that's spinning? And the reason is because if we're to believe that we are part of something like a galaxy with septillion amounts of planets, it's got like 24 zeros on it, septillion. This is what we were told. How do they know? Nobody's been to these planets, these stars, these galaxies. If we think that we're spinning in a chaotic universe, one planet out of all of this, what the F are we? We're insignificant. We don't have much purpose. We're wandering. We're lost. Our minds are like, what's going on? And so we walk around with this sense of, I don't know, I'm trying to figure it out, like every single one of us feel all the time. We're trying to find some purpose to it. We're trying to see if we really even matter. We are the center of the universe. We are on a flat plane that does not move. It's completely still. You observe it with your senses. You go out and you feel calmness and serenity. You're grounded to the earth, and not because of gravity, not because everything's spinning in perfect relativity to each other, but because we are on something that is still. There's a firmament above us with stars and constellations that we've seen for thousands of years that never go away, because that is rotating around us. And when it comes back around and we see it with perfection, what's above that realm, NASA doesn't even really know. No satellites have been past it. Nobody's actually been to the moon. This is all a hoax. Why would we be fooled to this degree? Because if you think that you're in something chaotic and you're spinning and you don't even know what you are and you're this random creature on a random planet, then what the F are you? So it's the total opposite. Everything is revolving around you. You really, really are the center of it. This changed my life when I found this out. I never even thought that the earth was like a circle, like a sphere that's spinning, but I didn't know what it was. And then I found out all this stuff, and when you resonate with something, every single part, every cell of your being just starts to go, oh yeah, like I don't know the actual mathematics, I don't know the research, but I know that this is true. And nobody's been able to prove it otherwise. Everywhere you go, the skydiving, the everything, there's no curve, man. There's no curve. We're surrounded by an ice barrier, 360 degrees around our flat terrain. And below us is water, and above us is water. And we have, like the gentleman said, realms. There's realms, it keeps going, but from our perspective, there's an above and there's a below. And every, like he said, every culture in the past showed it. They showed it in their depictions, in their images. But this is what it is. This is a flat egg dome shape, and we're here in this middle band, and nobody's on a freaking ball spinning. And we can feel it. It's something you can observe. I just wonder.
That was a very. That was awesome.
There could be that interpretation because of my background, but I left politics a number of years ago and have run a news organization for the last 2 years. So we just expect to do fine, balanced journalism.
Do you guys use Wikipedia at all?
Yeah.
Do you trust the information on Wikipedia?
As much as you can trust information on the internet, I guess.
From my knowledge of what Wikipedia is, everyone can sort of add to it if they want to. So what makes that actually the right information in there?
Change things on it. You've
never seen that?
Yeah. You can change things. Someone went and changed something, and then they went back later, and it was rechanged back to what it said before. So that's.
Yeah, I use it. I'm an engineer, and when I look up science terms I don't know, Wikipedia on Google's the first thing that comes up, so I tend to go right there.
Yeah, I'm a student, so I definitely wouldn't use it in anything that I would turn for school, but if I'm looking up like music or, you know, quick references for stuff in the news, then yeah.
Stuff that I don't really need to know exact information for, like if I want to know when a TV series started or when a movie was made, stuff like that.
I found some inaccurate stuff, like formulas, when you search for formulas in engineering. It's very descriptive, almost to the point where it's like almost useless.
I'm a history major, so they always tell us not to use it as a credible source.
Yeah, they tell us. I don't know if it's like credible or not, but I'm assuming it is.
There was actually a study done comparing the information in Wikipedia with the information in the Encyclopedia Britannica. Yeah. They found out that the error rate for specific data points was about equal, which is interesting because Wikipedia is totally a self-edited effort.
Does it get reviewed to find out if it's...
No.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Does that change your opinion?
It's still really convenient.
Wire.com has uncovered a 2006 study written for the U.S. Special Operations Command that suggests the military should clandestinely recruit or hire prominent bloggers. The report stated, quote, hiring a block of bloggers to verbally attack a specific person or promote a specific message may be worth considering. The report also suggested the Pentagon hack blogs that promote messages that are antithetical to U.S. interests. The report stated, quote, hacking the site and subtly changing the messages and data, merely a few words or phrases, may be sufficient to begin destroying the blogger's credibility with the audience.
The average American would be so shocked to find out there's something called COINTELPRO, the FBI's covert action programs against American citizens. Now, this Senate report tells what the FBI was doing against the American citizens, literally. Here's their statement. COINTELPRO began in 1956, in part because of the frustration with the Supreme Court rulings limiting the government's power to proceed overtly against dissident groups. It ended in 1971 with the threat of public exposure. The Bureau conducted, their terms, a sophisticated vigilante operation aimed squarely at preventing the exercise of First Amendment rights of speech and association.
And it is our duty as loyal Americans to shut up
My name is Charlotte Thompson Isserbade, and I served as Senior Policy Advisor in the United States Department of Education under the Reagan administration, during which I had access to all of the most important documents for the restructuring of not only American education, but global education. And I'm also the author of The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, which gets into all of this, gives the background of what I saw not only in the Department of Education, but as a local school board member. I was trained to identify the resistors to the sex ed, drug ed, alcohol ed, suicide ed, death ed, those good, smart Americans who realize that anything that has education hanging off the end of it is probably not what they're looking for. I was trained to identify those good people and to go up against them, and actually to go and try to get them to join us through the group process system, make them feel important, get them on a committee. And when that just blew my mind. I have to say, people often ask me, what is it that got you involved in education? Well, finding out what I saw at the local level certainly upset me. When I went and I saw that Americans were being trained to identify resistors, you know, then I got pretty upset. And luckily, there was a big book that came with the in-service training called Innovations in Education, A Change Agent's Guide. And I was able to take that back home with me. Unbelievable examples of how to con the Christians and different people who are upset with what you're trying to do, how to bring them over to your side, case studies, true case studies of educators who had put programs in that normally, you know, in a normal American town, nobody would want them. How did they manage to get them in? How did they con the people? And the other thing was, not only was I trained to identify the resistors, I was trained to go to the important people, high profile, highly thought of people in the community, with the Rotary and Chamber of Commerce, Garden Club, you name it, the different groups in our towns. Go to them and convince them of the importance of these new programs like sex ed, drug ed, I just mentioned all of them, and to get them on your side, because when you can get the leadership in a community to go along with it, then the newspaper comes in and says, you know, a committee's been set up with the head of the Rotary and this and that, and they're all getting behind this task force to discuss whether we're going to have a new sex education program. And then when Mary Jones, you know, who ordinarily would think, why would we want to have a sex education program when we don't have any problems with kids having sex or anything? So she might be you know, concerned. She might be one of the resistors. She reads that her best friend, who's the head of the Garden Club, is on this committee, and she thinks, oh, well, hey, Mary Appleton is on that committee. She's heading it up. It must be okay. So I was taught really how to con the community. They always call everybody by the first name. You have to get very, you know, affectionate with people, and you say, William, you know, I'm so glad you've come to this meeting, and I understand your concerns about this program, because you know, I've had other people, usually it's the really bright people in the community who have these concerns, and would you like to join our group? The original program was funded by what would subsequently become my office. It was funded by the Office of Research in the U.S. Office of Education, because it was funded early on, about the late 60s. Still funded, by the way. And the money went to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor to a professor by the name of Ronald Havelock. And he was the one that put together the whole training, the whole seminar, the book. And in the back of the book you had, they admitted it, right in the back of the book, they had about 100 major change agents listed from all over the country. Some of them I recognize, some I still don't, but some I do. And so this was a very important project. And it was being, you know, it was being carried out in I'm sure, all over the country, not just where I was. This was in Searsport, Maine, this lovely little town on the coast of Maine, in the school there where the guy came in, the facilitator, not Professor Havelock, but a facilitator, to train us. And these were good people that were there. You know, they were some of the teachers from my school, where I was on the local school board, principals, etc. Normal-looking Americans. You know, you really ask yourself, they must themselves have reacted very much the way I did. That's why I've always had a lot of understanding for teachers that have to go through this stuff. I didn't have to continue going through it. They've had to, through the years, constant training, retraining, sensitivity training, break their values. Right, no wrong. You've got to have all religions represented, so, you know, tolerant of everything, and because that's the New World disorder, excuse me. Professor Benjamin Bloom is probably the most important behavioral psychologist ever to live. I mean, maybe not quite as much as Pavlov and Skinner, but he really implemented the system in education in the United States. And he was the author of the Taxonomy of Educational Objectives. And I know that doesn't mean much to us. It means a lot to teachers. They know. All teachers have to go through that, Bloom's taxonomy. And just to give you an idea of how blatant they are, Benjamin Bloom said the purpose of education, and I often say this to parents, really listen to this. You think the purpose of education is reading, writing, and arithmetic? The purpose of education is to change the thoughts, actions, and feelings of students. And then he goes on and he says, he defines good teaching, and this is even worse from the parental standpoint, as challenging the student's fixed beliefs. And then, in some of his works that I have, that are in my book, a lot of this stuff is in it.
When he says challenge, does he mean challenge or does he mean change? Change their fixed?
Yeah, through challenging. It's through challenging. You go up against them and you change them. And you asked a good question, because then he goes on in one part of the taxonomy that is in my book. He says that he can take a student from here to there, from a belief in God or his country or whatever, to being an atheist and not believing in his country in 1 hour.
Did he do that?
Oh yeah, he does it. And I've seen it with students. I've seen it with young people. And they don't even know, and teachers don't even know. That's why if you talk to teachers about it often, they'll really have an awfully hard time dealing with it. And if you go up to a superintendent, an educational administrator, superintendent or whatever, and you ask him or her, have you ever been through sensitivity training? They'll usually crack up because they went through it. They're the worst, those programs. I've been through them. I mean, how can anything be worse than some of the ones that the regular classroom has? But they're the worst.
What do they teach the children?
To bring about change. They put them through role-playing, psychodrama, all these psychological techniques where they play the part of starving children, and the other one plays the part of a very wealthy industrialist child. And, you know, they bring about the attitude and value change through the emotions. You know how young people are. You know, they're naturally very altruistic, and they want to help, and they don't like to see poverty around the world. And so what they'll do is, just like I think I mentioned to you earlier, all right, I don't know whether I did, going into the teacher putting in the new social studies program in our community and walking through, taken the little tots through town and identifying big rich people's houses and small poor people's houses. That's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Getting them young and making them feel sorry for the people who live in the trailer across from the captain's house, because they only eat hot dogs, not steak. And then they'll do the same thing with Ethiopia or wherever, some third world country, showing them the children dying, and then they'll show pictures of our affluence. And what do you eat for breakfast? Oh, you have eggs and bacon and cereal and orange juice and grapefruit and everything. Yum, yum, yum. Do you really think it's fair? Common unity. That's what we call it. Common unity. There's no role for the individual in the community. And for everything that goes on in the Soviet Union or communism is based on the community, the commune.
And it is our duty as loyal Americans to shut up.
Our eyes and experience tell us the earth is flat and motionless and everything in the sky revolves around us. But when we cease to believe our own eyes and experience, we have to prostrate ourselves at the feet of these very pseudoscientists who are blinding us, treat them as experts, astronomical priests who have special knowledge only they can access, like the Hubble telescope. So by brainwashing us of something so gigantic and fundamental, it actually makes every other kind of lesser indoctrination a piece of cake. Earth being the flat, fixed center of the universe around which everything in the heavens revolves gives a special importance and significance not only to Earth, but to us humans, the most intelligent among the intelligent designers' designs. By turning Earth into a spinning ball thrown around the sun and shot through infinite space from a godless Big Bang, they turn humanity into a random, meaningless, purposeless accident of a blind, dumb universe. So it's like trauma-based mind control, beating the divinity out of us with their mental manipulations. People are always asking, why do they do this? Other than the obvious profit margin motive, NASA being the biggest black budget black hole in existence, sucking in over $30 billion taxpayer money for the fake moon landings alone. Nowadays, hundreds of billions of dollars, and not just NASA, but RASA and all the other fake space organizations around the world, giving CGI images for hundreds of billions of dollars. So this modern atheist Big Bang heliocentric globe Earth chance evolution paradigm spiritually controls humanity by removing God or any sort of intelligent design and replaces purposeful divine creation with haphazard random cosmic coincidence. And so by removing Earth from the motionless center of the universe, these Masons have moved us physically and metaphysically from a place of supreme importance to one of complete nihilistic indifference. If the Earth is the center of the universe, then the ideas of God, creation, and a purpose for human existence are resplendent. But if the Earth is just one of billions of planets revolving around billions of stars and billions of galaxies, then the ideas of God, creation, and a specific purpose for Earth and human existence become highly implausible. So by surreptitiously indoctrinating us into their scientific materialist sun worship, not only do we lose faith in anything beyond the material, we gain absolute faith in materiality, superficiality, status, selfishness, hedonism, and consumerism. If there's no God and everyone's just an accident, then all that really matters is me, me, me. So they've turned Madonna and the Mother of God into the material girl living in a material world. Their rich, powerful corporations with their slick sun cult logos sell us idols to worship, slowly taking over the world while we tacitly believe their science, vote for their politicians, buy their products, listen to their music, watch their movies, all sacrificing our souls at the altar of materialism.
Touche, my man.
It's a big deception. I'd say it's the biggest cover-up and conspiracy in history. We've been completely deluded for 500 years.
President Business is going to end the world? But he's such a good guy. And Octan, they make good stuff. Music, dairy products, coffee, TV shows, surveillance systems, all history books, voting machines. Wait a minute.
What they don't realize is that this is all a space-based religion. It's all religious. It's a religion for the hate of God, for hatred for a creator. You don't have to agree with me. If you don't want, you can disagree with that. But if you're an atheist, then you love the globe. You aren't the center, idiot. You're an insignificant speck of dust. We all came from nothing. Evolution happened. We came from an amoeba, and we're on a spinning ball amongst billions of others of spinning balls, and space is endless. What a great religion if you're an atheist. It's the best religion ever. It's like, yeah, we're all natural. We're not insignificant. We're just here. We're just spinning. We live and die. There's nothing else. There's nothing before. What a great religion for atheists. And guess what it all is? It's all wizardry. And check out Owen Benjamin, who does a better job than I can explaining this, but it's all wizardry. Because when we look up, there it is, an empty slate. So what better stage for wizardry than nothing and everything? They can make up whatever they want. It's an empty slate, an empty stage, an open book for imagination, for pretend, for fantasy, for Disney. What better plan for lying to the world than to make up a bunch of stories about a fantasy place that you can see with your telescope, but you'll never go to. But if you pull out that telescope there, that light in the sky, those are all other suns. And think of all the magic there is in this fantastical world. Anything can happen in space. Anything does happen. Anything that can happen does happen. There in what is it? Saturn and Jupiter, it rains diamonds, folks. Has anyone ever told you a more fantasy bullshit story than that? It rains diamonds on the planet light in the sky, Jupiter. It's raining diamonds. Don't you want to go there? Don't you want to be a part of space? Don't you want to shovel your money into this space economy. That's another thing, and I don't know if people know this. The space economy is $350 billion per year. Okay, that's the value of the space economy. Now let me ask you about this. Video games. How big of an economy are video games? Huge. Think of Fortnite. Everybody I see has a Fortnite sweater on, or all these different video games and Call of Duties and all these different video games. Think of how huge the video game industry is. Guess what? The video game industry per year, $90 billion. Space economy, $350 billion. It's all fake. That's the thing. At least video games, you can go buy one, come home and play it on your computer, but play it on your Xbox One, whatever. At least you have that. $90 billion a year. But for the space economy, the economy of pretend, the economy of fantasy, the economy of look at the endless sky and planets raining diamonds and all this nonsense and these, the oceans on the moons, and it's all such garbage. And that garbage, that open slate, that empty stage, is worth $350 billion a year. And you don't think they'll fake it? I mean, again, I've gone through this on many of my videos. Think of everything that they do. Think of everything that they fake. Think of everything they lie about. And all of a sudden, the place that you can't go, the empty stage, the empty arena that is space, you don't think they're going to lie to you about it? Oh, man, you got another thing coming. I don't know what else to tell you.
As also stated earlier, John Whitesides Parsons, chemist and rocket engineer extraordinaire, was the actual creator of the Caltech lab eventually called JPL, or, among insiders, Jack Parsons Lab. And while there is very little official biographical information to be found on him in the general literature, it is a curious fact that most of his papers and books are still classified by the Department of Defense. One thing that is known, at least within the planetary science community, is that Parsons has been officially immortalized by the International Astronomical Union by having a crater named for him on the moon. It is therefore extremely puzzling that the rest of Parsons' life, in comparison to far more obscure space scientists and engineers, is relatively unknown, even among avid JPL enthusiasts. Perhaps the reason for this paucity of information has something, perhaps a lot, to do with certain aspects of Parsons' private life that most at NASA and JPL, actually in the know, might rather be forgotten. Because one striking aspect of Parsons' private life that has been well documented outside of official governmental sources and publications is his curious association with an individual known as Aleister Crowley. Given Crowley's overwhelming and intensely controversial interests, the demonstrable importance of Crowley in Jack Parsons' private and professional life, stay tuned, and an inexplicable Crowleyan pattern that has recently emerged in all JPL missions, one feels compelled to ask at this late date, who was Aleister Crowley? And what was his heretofore unseen but apparently highly influential role in the founding and evolution of this critical national space facility called JPL? Aleister Crowley was the premier self-styled Western magician of the 20th century, who some have called the most evil man in the world. Crowley simply termed himself the Great Beast. You wouldn't invite him to dinner. Whose secret name in his order was Phoenix, for reasons that will later become apparent. Parsons became one of Crowley's greatest students and was said to have been his personally chosen successor. I mean, let me repeat that. We have documentation, no question, that Parsons was selected by Crowley to be his successor in these arcane, magical rituals and ceremonies and practices. This is not something you're going to get from a NASA press release, all right? Parsons quickly moved up the ranks of Crowley's organization called the Order of the Eastern Temple and was eventually appointed head of the lodge in Pasadena by Crowley himself. Parsons swore an oath of allegiance to guide humanity into, quote, an age of communion with the gods. Is this something you're going to read in NASA's official stuff? Using his demonstrable vast talents of insight and science and, in his own words, magic, 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 magic.
It's going to sound crazy, but I was listening to John Lennon's Imagine, one of the worst songs ever made. Like, it's brilliant wizardry, but it's truly horrifying. Imagine there's no heaven, no hell below us, imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, but above us only sky, right? So, just like when I stopped watching porn and I replaced it with conspiracy videos, right? The way things work, the way humans work, the way consciousness works, the way everything works, is you have to replace things with things. So we are a people that looks up to God, and we pray. And we look up and we can't believe the majesty of the clouds, and we think about heaven and just the enormity and the beauty of it. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. So we took the action of looking up and seeing God, and we don't see God up anymore. We see empty space coupled with infinite possibilities. It's the ultimate wizard spell. Because Isaac Asimov, and according to Vox Day, his son is like one of the worst pedophiles in history. A lot of these sci-fi guys are fucking awful human beings, by the way. So you have all these wizards, these high-level wizards, and they'll phrase it in ways that'll blow your fucking mind. Where they're like, this blew my mind when someone said that there's more galaxies in the universe than grains of sand on all the beaches in the world. So you think, a galaxy is full of solar systems that are full of planets. I mean, even if you have a bunch of planets with nothing on there, it's like the odds that there's another planet like us or another planet like, it could be anything, right? In your mind now, it goes infinite. It goes, anything you can imagine is there. All the grains of sand in all the beaches. There's more galaxies than that. But it's also completely void of everything. Like the space between it's like 1 light year is the distance that light travels in a year. That's 186,000 miles a second. So a full year is a distance that we cannot comprehend. That is the emptiness. That is an emptiness that you can't wrap your mind around. And space is completely empty. It has no atmosphere. It has nothing. It is the absence of everything. So what does it do simultaneously? What is this generation lost in space with no time left to start again? I mean, it's in the songs. The devil can't. So we look up and we see complete emptiness. Like we are a speck. We are nothing. We are a ball spinning with no direction in a sea of emptiness that we can't possibly conceive of. Nothing is there. But simultaneously, anything you can possibly imagine is up there as well. We have a giant Earth, and we can do amazing things here, and it's designed for life. But yet, we're already not looking at it. We're done with it. We've ruined her. We've raped and murdered and sacrificed. And now when we look up, we don't see God in the heavens just saying, one day you'll get here, be a good person. You look down, you don't see hell, you don't see Jimmy Savile, all the people that fucked up that are now burning in hell. No, you see like the mantle and the nickel core and the blah, blah, blah. They took away our connection to everything. And they replaced it with nonsense. Infinite vastness and infinite possibilities, and none of it you can ever accomplish. That's the ultimate fucking psyop. It's like, it's perfect and evil as fuck. Just believe. Do you question science? Do you question science? It's like, who gives a fuck? We're not going. We're not living there. It's impossible to go there. We can't get back to the fucking moon, apparently. We never went to the moon, guys. We never went to the moon. And there's a reason these lies exist. It's to keep people, it's to keep their eyes in that shit, that just fucking nonsense. Infinite emptiness, infinite nihilism. The amount of empty, just random, hopeless black, coupled with anything you can imagine. How the fuck is that not a psyop? And then you couple that with the fact that all evidence says that we never went to the moon and that NASA just endlessly lies. It was started by an SS Nazi who was best friends with Walt Disney. They said they no longer have the technology. They erased all the tapes and no other countries ever went to the moon. How can you believe that? How can you live in a world where you aren't skeptical enough, or you're like so just, you just have to fucking fit in? Are you scared? Like, what is it? Everything isn't a lie. Yeah, we faked the fucking moon landing. So what? That's a real keyboard. This is a real fucking White Claw spritzer. It's freeing. It makes you realize that, like, that cognitive dissonance that people feel all the time and can't put their finger on it and just get angry at dumb shit. And it's like, just let it go.
The globe and the heliocentric model of the solar system. What a truly amazing accomplishment of man. It took the collective efforts of some of the greatest minds of all time, over 2,000 years, to invent this model. It was a reverse-engineered masterpiece. Every objection to the model always met with just another cleverly disguised reverse-engineered explanation. For example, the lacking stellar parallax was rationalized by the stars being trillions upon trillions of miles away. A bunch of zeros were added to the end of their numbers to explain away what any common sense would refute. What these men did was invent a dual system of astronomy, a second model of the universe that can explain everything we observe, a model built on perfected mathematics that have no actual relevance to the truth. As George Orwell once wrote in his prophetic book, 1984, "What are the stars?" said O'Brien indifferently. "They are bits of fire a few kilometers away. We could reach them if we wanted to, or we could blot them out. The Earth is the center of the universe. The sun and the stars go round it." When we navigate the ocean, or when we predict an eclipse, we often find it convenient to assume that the Earth goes round the sun, and that the stars are millions upon millions of kilometers away. But what of it? Do you suppose it is beyond us to produce a dual system of astronomy? The stars can be near or distant, according as we need them. Do you suppose our mathematicians are unequal to that? Have you forgotten doublethink? These men invented a dual system of astronomy, and these men marveled at their accomplishments. Finally, we shall place the sun himself at the center of the universe. The globe, heliocentrism, the Big Bang Theory, evolution, all pseudoscientific lies taught to us as fact, and we are taught lie after lie after lie. They need to keep us completely ignorant and uninformed, and for the exact same reason that they didn't educate the slaves. An uneducated slave was much easier to control than an educated one, and slavery still exists today. It has just evolved beyond the ball and chain. Instead of forced labor, we are allowed to have the illusion of education, and we are allowed to choose our own profession. This illusion of freedom and this illusion of choice makes us more productive. The more productive we are, the more taxes we can pay. We are all just small cogs in a massive machine. We are their slaves. We are their debt slaves. So like any slave, why would they ever tell us the truth? Knowledge is power, and he who holds the knowledge holds the power. They pretended to give us educations, but all it was a watered-down curriculum designed to prevent your mind from reaching its true potential. All it was government indoctrination, and people gobbled up lie after lie. All these lies serve one master agenda, and that's to remove God from creation. Their answer for a randomly created, godless universe was the Big Bang Theory, which requires spherical-shaped stars and planets formed through gravity to even be plausible. It doesn't work if the Earth is flat. How could they go about creating a theory of how a flat Earth, with all the heavenly bodies revolving around it, could be randomly created without the intelligence of a supreme being? They cannot. A flat, geocentric Earth proves creation, and this is a huge problem for the people who possess the power here on Earth. And here's what it all boils down to. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one or love the other. No one can serve both God and money. No one can serve both God and greed. The Bible clearly describes a flat and stationary earth with boundaries, a beginning and an end, as all things have. So if the earth were flat, it would prove God's word, and Satan is constantly telling us the opposite of what God's word tells us. All of Satan's lies blind us from the truth and lead us further away from God. They work hard to try to hide God from us because no one can serve two masters. They want money to be your master. They need you to be a debt slave to their grand monetary Ponzi scheme because it is you, the common worker, that keeps this matrix alive and functioning. If people knew 100% that God is real, that there truly is an afterlife, and that this physical state we are in is only a tiny blip on the radar, they would stop showing up to their dead-end jobs working for slave wages, and they would stop being debt slaves to the bankers who rule over us, and people would choose to serve God instead of money. The entire system would collapse. These carefully manufactured lies all serve one agenda, and that is to hide God, so that we will continue to serve them and their debt-based money system and not God, because no one can serve two masters.
So, other planets.
Other planets, okay. Well, other planets, honestly, we don't know what they are, and honestly, I don't think NASA does either. When you observe a planet through a telescope, you see a light in the sky. Like, I have a 10-inch bead LX200. Okay, I've been this amateur astronomer for a long time. I know what people see in the sky, and typically what people say is, well, how come other planets are spheres and the Earth isn't? Well, first of all, you cannot make the conclusion that other planets are spheres, because what we're seeing is something that's rendering out as a circle, right? But we're not seeing it in 3 dimensions. You can't see it in 3 dimensions, first of all, because in order to be able to perceive something in 3 dimensions, like those balls, you have to have a binocular vision. In other words, instead of one, you have to have binocular to be able to perceive 3 dimensions. So again, when we look at Jupiter, we look at Mars, you know, there are lights in the skies to the naked eye. When we look through a telescope or maybe a good zoom camera, we see a circle, right? A circle is not a sphere, and that's really important to make that distinction. Okay. So to arbitrarily make the assertion that, you know, these round lights in the sky are spheres is really quite folly, right? So again, what are they precisely? They are some sort of energetic construct, because the lights in the skies, if you look at it biblically, and I'm not a religious person, however, if you look at this construct energetically, then these lights in the skies are points of energy that control this matrix, essentially, that we're in. Okay, and beyond that, I really couldn't say what they are. But we have named them. We've named them, and we call them the wandering stars. They don't, you know, planets is something that's relatively new. And you know, Earth isn't a planet, it's a plane. And all observations tell us that. We've never been able to measure curvature. Believe me, we're out here trying.
The curvature is a weird thing. I don't feel like the equation is correct. Like Adam and I were talking about it. We've talked about this a number of times.
Well, here's the deal with the equation. First of all, when you think about the equation of 8 inches per mile squared, it's an exponential equation because of the squaring of the miles. Okay? But it's only really accurate as compared to using like the Sagitta to about 1,000 miles. After that, it really starts deviating. Okay, and it gets really, really far off. When you get to 2,000 miles, it's almost unusable, all right? Because really, if you plot that 8 inches per mile squared, and if you plotted it around a circle, what it would do is it would go in a spiral, right? And what we're trying to describe is a circle, or the outer edge of a sphere. So, yes, when you're talking about to try and calculate the entire circumference, the 8 inches per mile falls woefully short. But for our purposes, trying to figure curvature in 100 miles, we can't really see much beyond that. Maybe 200 miles occasionally. It works perfectly. And it agrees exactly with AutoCAD calculations, and it also agrees perfectly with Sagitta, using the Sagitta methodology, which is a much more accurate methodology. So, again, yeah, on the most technical level, 8 inches per mile squared fails, but only because when you get past that 1,000-mile mark, it starts making a wide deviation. Again, the plot turns into a spiral.
So spherical bodies. What about the moon? We can see the spherocism of the moon.
Sphericity of the moon?
Sphericity.
Yes.
Nice word. Yes.
Yes. Can you? Think about this for a second. If I took one of those balls, and I shined a light on it, right? How do you think that ball's going to light up?
Light on one side, like cascading light over, and then dark on the back side.
Okay. It's going to light up the front with a hot spot, and it's going to diminish rapidly as it gets towards the center of the ball. Is it not? We can pull out a camera light and do it right now. Right?
That's good. Holly, do you want to sit down? So the sun is like forever away, right?
Yeah, so look at it. How is it? You see it? You don't see this lit fully, do you? You see a diminishing light. You see a hot spot here, and you see a diminishing light coming to the side, don't you?
Yes. Well, yes.
Now think about that for a minute. How is it? Very good. So, if you can't evenly light the ball, then how can you say that if the moon is a sphere, that it's lighting it perfectly during a full moon? It wouldn't work that way. In fact, in order to be able to do that, it would have to be either flat or slightly concave.
What about like a waxing or a waning where it's half lit? You can see a curvature. If you look through the telescope, you can see it. You can see the ridges on the outside like it's a ball. Like if you zoomed in on this, you can see the ridges on the
I agree.
outside.
You can see shadows in the craters. That's exactly right. And I'm not saying that there isn't a certain degree of reflectivity. However, in the flat Earth model, it's more of an energetic system, an energetic exchange where the sun is charging the moon. And the moon could very likely be something like celestine, or it could be limestone. Limestone will glow when it's hot. Celestine has some very interesting characteristics. But the bottom line is, if you're dealing strictly with geometry, and you're trying to light a ball, then the light will diminish to the sides. And that is completely inconsistent with what we see on a full moon.
So my argument to that would be that the sun is, I don't know how far away it is.
93 million miles from the heliocentric model.
All right, so that's a long ways away, right?
Yes.
And the light has that certain effect from a camera light 3 feet from each other. But if it's further away, I feel like it's more energetic, it would have a different effect.
If it's further away, it's still essentially, because remember, light travels in parallel lines, and that NASA even agrees with that. Light travels in straight parallel lines. In other words, it's not arcing through space or anything like that. It's traveling in parallel lines. So even the further away it is, the more that would even have to be true. That it wouldn't be able to light the entire surface of the ball evenly. You would see an absolute gradient of it getting darker and darker and darker as it came to the halfway mark of the ball.
Well, I feel like we can sort of experience that during the day. Like the sun rises, the sun looks bigger because it's through the atmosphere or whatever. And as it goes up, it gets hotter and hotter, and right as it's at its peak, it's the most bright, the most hot. And then as it goes down, it gets less and less.
I don't know if it would be the most bright, but I would say that it's definitely the most hot. And the reason that it's the most hot is because in both models you are in the direct line of sun rays. Okay? All right, so you're not in other words, at sunrise it's actually traversing those rays of sunlight through the atmosphere.
So there, in flat Earth, there's the atmosphere as well.
Yes, in flat Earth it would be very much the same way. There is a difference in the flat Earth model in that, obviously the sun in the flat Earth model would be 3,400 miles up, as is the moon. The sun in the heliocentric model is 865,000 miles in diameter versus the moon's diameter of 2,100 miles, okay? So the sun is 400 times bigger than the moon in the heliocentric model, but it's also coincidentally a perfect 400 times further away. In the flat Earth model, they're both the same size and they're both the same elevation. And so when you do the geometry between the two, it works out very well. In fact, it actually works out better in the flat Earth model. And this is something that's a big controversy right now, is this whole eclipse thing, because the eclipses...
That was my next step.
Yeah, the eclipses are a big problem. And in fact, I do a show called Globebusters, and one of the topics I'm going to be discussing tomorrow is this idea. And I just do a little thought experiment here, right? So NASA tells us that the alleyway, or the path of totality, is going to be about 70 miles wide. Now, that line of thinking comes from the idea, again, that the sun's diameter is 865,000 miles across, and of course it comes 400 times further, hits the moon, and it's basically causing the moon's shadow, right, to shrink, first of all, which doesn't make any sense.
Well, let's use that though. So the light travels in direct lines. Okay. So instead of a ball and a camera, it'd be a ball and that's like a bajillion times bigger. So it's all going the same.
That's true. But you have to think about this. When you and I look up in the sky, no matter what model we're talking about, we both see the sun and the moon as the same size in the sky.
Yes.
They are the same apparent size. Yeah. Okay. So that's really the important part here when you're looking at both of the models. All right. So now if the sun is causing an eclipse path on the Earth that is only 70 miles wide, if we were to stop that eclipse in its tracks, then we would essentially have a shadow 70 miles by 70 miles, right? It would be a tiny, minuscule amount on the Earth.
It's very difficult to see a total eclipse.
Exactly. So here's your thought experiment. Turn it around. Now when we have a lunar eclipse, okay, the Earth, where the Earth is supposedly blocking the moon, and the Earth is 4 times larger than the moon, then why is it instead of a 280-mile shadow on the moon, it eclipses the whole thing? That is illogical, and it is completely non sequitur. That doesn't make any sense. Think about that for a minute.
I'm trying to think about it. So the shadow should be smaller or larger?
The shadow should be larger, but it should only be 4 times larger at most, because the Earth is 4 times larger than the moon. So if the moon is only casting a 70-mile shadow on the Earth, then when you turn it around, then the Earth should be casting a 280-mile shadow on the moon, but instead it eclipses the entire 2,180 miles. How is that possible? Right?
And what does Flat Earth say about that?
Flat Earth model, it works perfectly.
So what is fighting the moon?
Well, okay, in the model, okay, this is where we have to go back to an area of cosmology that has been long forgotten. And cosmology, and even the ephemeris, okay, today, talks about dark bodies up there, okay? Lilith is one of them. The Vedic model, cosmology, has 2 bodies that are called Rahu and Ketu, and they're actually called dark bodies, right? Kind of like the black sun. You've heard of Nemesis, the black sun. Well, NASA modern astronomy tells us that they're not up there, but in fact, they've been caught on film, and that's one of the things we're trying to catch during this next eclipse. We have caught them before. The footage is not that great, but it's also been verified from different angles. So the legend of Rahu and Ketu is that Rahu is the head of a serpent, and Ketu is the body. And interestingly enough, when we looked during the last eclipse that happened a few years ago, they had a passenger airliner that went up specifically to look at the eclipse. And what they caught was little black bodies that were kind of serpent shaped, kind of like a, I don't know, you took a bunch of balls and put them together. So these are, we believe, the actual bodies of Rahu and Ketu, the black bodies in our system. And like I said, modern day ephemericists talk about black bodies, and ancient Vedic cosmologies, as well as almost every other cosmology on the earth, also talks about these black bodies. NASA, not so much. They want us to believe that it's all done by the sun and the moon. So that's the answer for that question.
Okay. So that is a good segue to my next question.
Okay.
Why is NASA lying to us? Why are all of the world governments lying to us? What are they gaining?
Let me ask you something. Have you looked into conspiracy theories much?
Yes.
All right.
Well, I have. Yeah,
okay.
Secondhand.
Secondhand, all right. I've been looking into them for 20 years, all right? And what you find out is at least what I found out is the more that I have looked into these conspiracies, they go well beyond the realm of theory. And many of them enter into the realm of conspiracy fact. When you look at 9/11, 9/11 was the biggest freaking farce ever.
I'm with you.
Yeah, okay, so you understand that. So what I'm suggesting to you is that 9/11 is only like a tip of the iceberg. That's only one of the things that they do. But the point is that if they have the balls to pull something like that off, and they have the balls to implement a financial system, the Federal Reserve, where our money is created out of thin air, and then they charge us interest on it. I mean, that's pretty audacious, is it not? You look at that, you look at 9/11, you look at Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook, no kids died on Sandy Hook. This is very blatantly obvious. And I know it's a touchy subject for some people, and I won't go there, and that's fine. But, okay, there's many other things. The Boston bombing. Absolutely complete horseshit. You know, red paint on the sidewalks, the whole 9 yards. My point is when you look and you start understanding the absolute multitude of all of these, you have to ask yourself why. What exactly are they trying to accomplish? And then when you take into consideration that a lot of people will say, well, people they just want money, they're money hungry or they're power hungry. No, it's much more than that. They want much more than the money. They print the money, for God's sakes. They don't need the money. They can buy anything with that money, which then in turn gives them power, right? So it's not about the power. What it is about is complete and total control of your mind. And one of the techniques that they're using to get this control of your mind is, first of all, to separate you from any idea of a creator. Now, I'm not religious, but I absolutely believe in a God, a creator. There's no. I look around and I look at this and I look at the world and I say, how could anybody not see this as intelligently designed? You know, for me to swallow the idea that all of this happened as some sort of cosmic explosion that then morphed into all of this wondrous thing, you know, our DNA sequences, things that are absolutely impossible. That's kind of akin to, you know, somebody blowing up an alphabet factory and it coming down and landing in a Shakespeare and creating a Shakespeare. It's ridiculous, right? I don't buy it. I don't think anybody that really contemplates it for a while could possibly ever buy it.
So with that, I come from an anthropological background. I studied at university, and I fully believe in evolution, and I think that things have taken millions of years to billions of years.
And yet, where's the proof? Where's the proof? There is no proof. The missing link. All these things they're saying, we have not a single example of things evolving into other species. You know, you could say, well, what about butterflies from caterpillars? That's a metamorphosis. That is not an evolution of species.
It is not at all.
Right. So there is no evidence for evolution. Okay.
So what about selective breeding with dogs? They're not all. We didn't have teacup chihuahuas 100 years ago.
Right. That again is selective breeding, and that's kind of like, what about humans? If you have a person that's African American that mates with somebody that's clearly Caucasian, you get a mulatto baby typically, right? And then somewhere down the line, one particular genetic line could become dominant, and that mulatto baby or a descendant could marry another white person or black person and have a baby of the complete different color, right? So the bottom line is there is really no evidence for evolution. I mean, when you really get down to brass tacks. And that's something we could debate back and forth, but seriously, when you look into it, there isn't any evidence for it. All right, so again, this all leads us back to the idea that we're just some sort of cosmic accident when one day nothing exploded into everything and then evolved into us today. That is so absurd. It's ridiculous.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. But it's much more plausible, don't you think, to think that we are intelligently designed and we were created.
By who?
Who knows? By possibly...
Where is this creator now?
This creator could be a quote-unquote alien race, or it could be a race that's on a different part of the plane that has genetically engineered us, right? It's much more easy to believe that than to believe that we exploded and fell out of a monkey's butt. I'm sorry. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it, all right? So, but the bottom line is this is what you do. That's one of the first steps, is you separate yourself from a creator. You then tell the people that we are on a planet that's in the middle of a galaxy that is one of quadrillions of other potentially habitable planets. What does that make you feel like? That makes you feel very insignificant, right? So this is only part of the formula of disconnecting you from realizing what you truly are. So, and that is the whole idea. And like I said, if you look at it biblically, you could say, well, this is the work of Satan or whatever. But let's face it, whether Satan exists or not, darkness and evil certainly does. You would have to be blind not to see it around you everywhere.
Are those value judgments, or is there really evil and really good? Are those facts, or are they value judgments?
Then you're getting into philosophical grounds there.
It's all philosophical.
Well, of course, you could say, my perception of something that's evil is different than yours. So what does that do? That makes it subjective, right? Okay, so we're starting to get into a whole other discussion, and we can stray off into that quite easily. But keeping it on the bullet points, as it were. Okay, you ask why they would do this, and if everything that I've said is true so far, if you are in a position to try and disconnect somebody from their own humanity and their own God, or the idea that they're part of a creation and are in fact special, then you would try and make them think in every way that they're insignificant. It's a matter of evolution. Only the strong survive. Right? And these are the very things they tell us, right? And they give us examples in the animal world. Look at nature, how it works. Only the strong survive there. But we're a little different than that. We have the ability we have a frontal lobe. We can make these decisions.
And that evolved, in my opinion. That evolved.
How did it evolve? Because monkeys did it? I mean, how do you know that it wasn't just created? Didn't it make sense? I mean, they're talking about creating superhumans now. How are they going to do that? They're talking about doing it by genetically modifying us, right?
Right.
Okay, so again, that's a creation. That is not an evolution. And I don't believe for one second that mankind today is smarter than they were 2,000 years ago. Yes, we have technological differences, but that doesn't mean that the IQ is necessarily higher.
I'm with you. 50,000 years ago, modern humans were here, as intelligent as we are, just with much less accumulated knowledge, much less technology. Okay. They with speech,
and even the idea of us being here 50,000 years ago is debatable, right? Because let's face it, history, there is no real record of history beyond 500 years ago. We hear about stuff 2,000 years ago, but all of that stuff was basically destroyed in book burnings and the Library of Alexandria being destroyed. In other words, we've really been disconnected from our past. So most of this stuff is high speculation, and it's hearsay.
I won't debate you on that. What about carbon dating with bones?
That's another thing. That's a joke. Okay, carbon dating. first of all, they do the carbon dating by doing molecular decay, supposedly carbon atoms, right? But then they make those distinctions by things that they're assuming about other elements, right? So, and I don't know a whole lot about this, but what I do know is there's a whole lot of assumptions going on between it. So just like the whole idea of dinosaurs, 65 million years ago, there are no complete fossils. There are no complete bone structures of dinosaurs out there. They're only very fragmented, and most of what you see at the museum, in fact, in excess of probably 90%, is manufactured. And this is openly admitted, right?
Because you can't have dinosaur bones and everything. There's limited amounts of dinosaur bones.
But what does mainstream science teach us? They teach us like this is absolute fact. Well, they have no idea that it's absolute fact, and in fact, it's pure conjecture and it's pseudoscience. They have no solid evidence that dinosaurs and their DNA or anything about them, yet they tell us, up at Red Rock, you can see scratches in the rocks because this is the mating ritual of a dinosaur. Where the hell did they pull that out of their butt, right? I mean, it's ridiculous the things that they just pull out of their ass and they tell us, they sell it to us as fact, right?
So carbon dating is quite interesting. So, aged volcano would put a layer of ash down, and then the ash would get covered by a bunch of other shit, and all the animals dying and whatever. And then another blast of volcano, and another layer of ash. And so they carbon date each layer of the stratum, or whatever.
Again, what is their reference point? That's the thing. What is their reference point? They're saying, well, we do the carbon dating related to the age of the rocks. Well, how do they know what the age of the rocks are? Well, we carbon date them. That's kind of a vicious circle type of thing. Another thing you have to think about too is a lot of the things they tell us about volcanoes. For example, they tell you're familiar with Devil's Tower in Wyoming, right?
Yes.
Right, Devil's Tower.
Tree theory.
Yeah, well, the tree theory maybe not, okay? But the point is that when you look at the top of Devil Tower, we have hexagonal basalt columns, right? And they tell us that this was created by a volcanic eruption millennia ago, all right? But the problem is basalt is amorphous. Basalt does not harden and congeal in hexagonal strands. So in other words, that's bullshit, even by our own geology today. Again, another complete pseudoscience. I mean, when you really start looking at a lot of the things that science tells us and really start scrutinizing it and looking at it closely, you find that they're completely speculating about most of this stuff. And that's the tip of the iceberg. So, you could go through, I could sit here and go through a million things with you on this, but my point is that what science tells us today, it is, they say, oh, well, we're peer reviewed. Everything we do is always peer reviewed. It's like, no, it's really not that way at all. In fact, the way science operates today is that if you don't go along with the mainstream line of how things are done, then you're cast out. You don't get funding. As long as you carry the company line, then you get your funding, you get your grants, you get corporate things like that. It's the way it works, right? Anybody that goes against that, geniuses like Nikola Tesla, they're ruined. And Tesla, I'm sorry, was probably arguably one of the most brilliant men to ever walk the earth. And he was completely shut down and made to look like a crazy man. This is the way science really operates. Now, I'm not saying that science is wrong. I mean, I'm an engineer. I'm an electrical engineer. And yes.
Do you work at an electrical company?
I own my own company.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, and I'm not saying that science is all wrong, because obviously, look what electrical engineers brought us. Technology like this. So, and people will say,
my sister's probably bored.
So people will say, oh, well, if you believe in this, you're denying science. No, I don't deny science. I deny certain parts of science. Paleontology, bullshit. Astronomy, bullshit. You know, they cannot prove these things that they're saying. You know, they're telling us the Polaris is 450 light years away. That's so many quadrillion miles. When you start really looking at this critically, first of all, by the inverse square law, light, there's no way it could possibly propagate that far unless it was so much brighter. I mean, the numbers would be unfathomable. Let's put it that way. Think about this for a second. If our sun is supposedly 865,000 miles in diameter, and it's 93 million miles away, and that equates to 8 light minutes, right? And if it goes from an 865,000 mile diameter to something that's this big in our sky in 8 light minutes, then what would it be like in 30 light minutes? What would it be like in a light hour? Now let's really get crazy, and what would it be like in 450 light years? It's complete bullshit. That's what it is. The stars are not light years away. They're not hundreds of thousands or millions of light years away. They are local, they're close, and that's another thing. You know, they tell us the reason the stars haven't ever changed in millennia, and they haven't, is because of their distance, right? Yet mankind has gone on for millennia. We've recorded the skies meticulously, and they have never, ever changed. Never. They tell us that we get a new North Star every 2,000 years, but they have no evidence of it, nor can they model it. Because if they model it, it throws off all the rest of the constellations. So what do? They just avoid that discussion. All right? All these things that I'm telling you are just the tip of the iceberg about how and why this all works. And a lot of people are beginning to understand that. That is why this flat earth movement or reawakening is going viral right now. Millions of people are going on board with it. I mean, our very first conference, you know, at this point is going to be bigger than any conference I've ever attended, you know, and it's astounding, you know. But that's all I'm saying is people are using their common sense. They're thinking about things like what I just told you, 8 light minutes, 865,000 miles too. It doesn't work that way, and nor can it, all right? Use common sense, that's all we're saying. We've never been able to see any curvature. We've never been able to measure any curvature. No rotation of the Earth has ever been measured. Einstein himself said that I have come to believe that there is no optical method, period, that can measure the rotation of the Earth. Do you feel like you're spinning at 1,040 miles an hour? And then going forward around the sun at 66,000 miles an hour, and then the sun going around the Milky Way at 600,000 miles an hour, and then the Milky Way going around the Great Attractor at nearly 2 million miles an hour.
Cool idea, though. I think that's a really fascinating idea.
It's what they're telling us is the truth.
Well, it's their idea.
Of course, yeah, it's their idea. But there's no parallax
I love
to
that
demonstrate
so
these.
much more than us being on like a thing and we're all like, we are it. I
this gives your life much more meaning. You are at the center of it all.
But yeah, good job, guys. This is it for now.
Yeah, you could, I guess you could simulate it.
And, in his own words, magic.
Simulate it.
Magic, magic, magic.